In June 2025, an important event took place in Russia, the prestigious St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. And during the event, which lasted 3 days, Vladimir Putin made an absolutely baffling statement. Pay close attention to what he said.
First of all, this situation is not the same, it's not fundamentally different. And secondly, we are not seeking Ukraine's surrender. We insist on the recognition of the realities that have formed on the ground. I've said many times that I consider the Russian and Ukrainian peoples to be truly one people. In this sense, all of Ukraine is ours without a doubt. And there are people, and not a few, in the neighboring country who seek to guarantee their sovereignty and independence, so let them have good health. And we, by the way, have never questioned, not even once, the right of the Ukrainian people to independence and sovereignty. But we have an old saying that's not really a proverb or a parable, but an ancient rule. Wherever the foot of a Russian soldier steps, that place is ours.
Those are bold statements. But little did he know that just a few days later, Ukraine would do something that would completely challenge those words. Something that may very well have put those grand plans of Putin in check. On June 14th, amid the bombastic statements, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made his own announcement.
There was a report from the Commander-in-Chief, Oleksandr Syrsky, about the front line, about our active operations. One point that deserves a lot of attention is towards Pokrovsk and our Sumy region. To the border areas of our Sumy region, we managed to drive the Russian troops out of there. I thank all our units that achieved this result. Based on the achievements of these days, the warriors of the 22nd Separate Assault Regiment deserve our special gratitude for their offensive actions in the border region of Sumy and the liberation of Andriivka in particular. Thank you very much, guys.
He is talking about Andriivka, a small village you have probably never heard of, but which may have completely changed Putin's calculations for this war. And now, I'm going to explain to you why. To understand why the liberation of Andriivka is so significant, I need to show you something. Remember back in February 2022 when Putin launched his full-scale invasion? One of the first regions he tried to capture was exactly Sumy, and that was no coincidence. Sumy is in northeastern Ukraine, right on the border with Russia. For Putin, controlling this region meant having a direct corridor to Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital. It was part of the plan for a quick and decisive victory. But something unexpected happened. On the first day of the invasion, more precisely on February 24, 2022, Russian forces entered Sumy. They expected minimal resistance. A big mistake. Instead, they found Ukrainian paratroopers and armed civilian volunteers who mounted a fierce defense. They not only held out, but managed to destroy an entire column of Russian tanks in urban combat. No.
Don't throw it, pour it in a column somehow differently. There, yes, yes.
And to achieve this impressive feat, the Ukrainians used a brilliant tactic that the military calls non-contiguous strong-point defense. It works more or less like this. While some troops defended the main cities, small groups of guerrilla fighters spread out across the countryside, attacking the Russian supply lines. In other words, it's as if they created a military spiderweb that prevented the Russians from organizing. And do you want to know what the result was? In a word, devastating. Putin's forces got caught in constant ambushes, unable to advance quickly toward Kyiv. And then, in April 2022, just 2 months later, the Russians were completely driven out of Sumy. And here we reach an important point, which completely breaks a very common narrative. Many people believe that Ukraine is only able to face Russia because of Western military support, but the reality is quite different. This historic victory in Sumy happened when Ukraine was fighting mainly with old Soviet-era equipment, basic rifles, and a few anti-tank missiles they had received. The massive Western military support we know today simply didn't exist yet. Now, consider this. Putin believed he could end the entire war in just 3 days. That was literally the Russian plan. 3 days to take Kyiv and force the Ukrainian surrender. But he was completely wrong. The heroic defense of Sumy, along with other resistance across the country, completely destroyed that expectation.
The governor of Sumy in northeastern Ukraine reported that the region is free of Russian forces. The announcement was made today, but authorities said the area is still not safe, and according to officials, there are still mine zones where demining work continues. With the withdrawal from Sumy, Russia has completed the withdrawal of troops from all of northern Ukraine, and all of this was achieved
purely by Ukrainians, with soldiers and civilian volunteers fighting with courage and tactical intelligence, without relying on the advanced weaponry they would receive later. It was only after the world saw this genuine capacity for resistance from the Ukrainians that Western countries began to send large-scale military support. The victory in Sumy was not the result of Western support. It was much more than that. It convinced the West to support Ukraine, and that victory had enormous consequences. First, it showed the world that Ukraine could actually fight and win, even when facing a military superpower. Second, keeping Sumy under Ukrainian control was crucial for Ukraine to launch, 2 years later, the famous Kursk offensive, invading Russian territory. And you know what? Putin never forgot that humiliation in Sumy. That's when, in 2025, he decided to try again. Now, I need to introduce you to the heroes of this most recent story, those of the 125th Separate Assault Regiment. This unit has a fascinating origin. It was created on March 8, 2022, just 2 weeks after the Russian invasion, by local volunteers from Kharkiv who wanted to defend their homeland. In the beginning, it was just a territorial defense battalion, but as they proved their worth in combat, they were promoted. In July 2023, they became an assault battalion of the ground forces. In February 2025, they were expanded into a full regiment. This evolution shows how a unit of civilian volunteers turned into one of Ukraine's most feared forces. The combat record of 225 Graus is impressive. They fought in Kharkiv, survived the hellish battles of Bakhmut, defended Andriivka, and took part in the Kursk offensive. In May 2024, they even managed to capture one of the most modern Russian tanks, the T-90M. Russian television even called them one of Ukraine's most powerful units, equipped with the best Western technology. But it was in June 2025 that they achieved their most significant recent victory. The battle for Andriivka began as yet another Russian attempt to create their buffer zone. A buffer zone is basically a strip of territory that Putin wants to control inside Ukraine to protect Russian border regions from Ukrainian attacks. It's like creating a territorial shield using occupied Ukrainian land. And to achieve this, Putin has concentrated more than 50,000 soldiers on the Sumy border, using small assault group tactics with motorcycles and vehicles to quickly capture border villages. And at that moment, Ukraine suffered a setback. On June 4th, the enemy's tactics worked. Russian forces managed to occupy Andriivka and the neighboring village of Vodolahy. To many observers, it looked like another Russian advance in a war where Russia had been gaining ground slowly but steadily. But little did they know that Ukraine had other plans. It was then that, on June 14th, just 10 days after the capture, the 125th Regiment launched a devastating counterattack. They not only retook Andriivka, but did so with such efficiency that it even surprised military analysts. Zelensky announced the liberation that same day, specifically praising the regiment's offensive actions. But that wasn't the end of the story. Even after the official announcement, there were still Russian soldiers hiding in the village. For a week, 225 Graus was involved in intense urban clearing combat. It was during this phase that one of their assault groups, known as Black Swan, managed to eliminate a Russian commander, Major Andrei Yartsev, in his own command post. Then, on June 22nd, the complete liberation of Andriivka was confirmed. The village was completely cleared of Russian forces. Now you might be wondering, why so much importance for a small village that most people have never heard of? Well, the answer lies in its strategic significance. First, Andriivka is just 5 kilometers from the Russian border. Controlling it means controlling one of the access routes to Ukraine. For Putin, this village was a key piece in his plan to create a buffer zone to protect Russian territory from Ukrainian attacks. Second, capturing and holding Andriivka cost significant Russian military resources. When Ukraine took it back, Putin literally went back to square one, only now in an even worse situation, with hundreds more casualties and lost equipment. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the victory in Andriivka forced Russia to withdraw troops from other fronts. Remember the 50,000 soldiers that Putin concentrated in Sumy? They came mainly from Donetsk, and this weakened the Russian offensive in the most important region of the war. The Ukrainian commander-in-chief confirmed that the actions in Kursk and Sumy prevented Russia from relocating 60,000 soldiers to reinforce operations in Donetsk. This means that the small Andriivka is helping to relieve the pressure on the most critical fronts. And there's also an even more important psychological aspect to this story. Look, for months, the dominant narrative has been that Russia is making steady advances. Small, but steady. The recapture of Andriivka completely breaks that narrative. It shows that Ukraine is not just defending itself, but is still capable of launching successful counterattacks and retaking lost territory. And that's not all. With Andriivka secured, Ukrainian forces are now advancing toward the next objective, Recapture. This village is about 14 kilometers from Andriivka and only 7 kilometers from the Russian border. It is currently being contested in an active combat gray zone. The commander-in-chief, Syrsky, reported that Ukrainian units advanced between 200 and 700 meters in different parts of the Recapture area. Brigadier General Ole Apostol, a hero of Ukraine and the newly appointed commander of the air assault forces, is leading these operations. What we are seeing in Sumy is a laboratory of modern warfare. Small, highly mobile units, drones, electronic warfare, all in a deadly dance where the ability to adapt quickly determines who wins. And in this game, the one from the 125th Regiment has proven to be exceptional. The liberation of Andriivka may seem small in the context of a continental war, but its impact goes far beyond its geographic importance. It represents Ukraine's ongoing ability to surprise, to fight back to prove that Putin's grand statements about all of Ukraine being Russian are still just empty words. While Putin speaks arrogantly in St. Petersburg, Ukrainian soldiers were proving meter by meter that the reality on the battlefield is very different from his expansionist dreams. And you, what do you think? Do you believe that Ukraine will be able to keep retaking territory, like in the case of Recapture? Will Putin keep insisting on making grand statements while losing territory? Or will he be forced to rethink his strategy? Leave your opinion in the comments. If this content helped you better understand what's happening in the war, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video. Quality information about current events is essential to keep everyone well informed. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.